US just quietly passed a law that could send Bitcoin to $1 million. But here's the terrifying catch. Pause. If Trump wins, 90% of investors will miss this loophole. And right now, the White House is racing to exploit it. Let me explain.
But now, with Trump endorsing it in the election, coming out really strong, setting up the crypto council, because the White House is now squarely behind this, they're undoing the bad Biden regulations, and they're pushing Congress to pass bills that go even further. You know, the Bitcoin reserve, Trump can set that up somewhat by moving things around in the executive branch, but to really fund it, it'll take some legislation passed out of Congress. Same thing with stablecoins.
Great place to start this conversation is everyone knows politicians are out there, they have policies, but I don't think people quite understand how much time, money, and effort in Washington, D.C., both from donors and from a lot of the strategists, is going into Bitcoin and crypto policy right now.
Yeah.
It seems like the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve was a shot heard around the world. Talk a little bit as to how is the DC circle talking about Bitcoin right now, and what do they want to happen with the asset?
So you're absolutely right.
Here's what's wild. Lindsey Graham used to hate Bitcoin. Now he's begging Congress to mine it. Why? Because the Pentagon just declassified a document proving Bitcoin is the only way to track terrorist cash. But the media won't tell you this.
There's a lot of energy there. You've got, prior to this, in the Biden administration, Bitcoin and crypto were bad words, right? Nobody wanted to acknowledge it. Most members of Congress didn't understand it. Our group, Club for Growth, interviews about 300 candidates a year. And that's where you start. You find out that more than half of them didn't know what it was, didn't understand it, they heard of it. And a few understood why it was a value to growth in the economy, but also, and Bitcoin in particular, a mechanism to ensure freedom for individuals to be able to control their own resources and be free of government interference if the government didn't agree with them. And those are the ones that we got behind and helped get elected. But now, with Trump endorsing it in the election, coming out really strong, setting up the crypto council with David Sachs and Bo Hines, who I saw on your podcast, Washington is abuzz because the White House is now squarely behind this. They're undoing the bad Biden regulations, and they're pushing Congress to pass bills that go even further. They had dealt with Bitcoin and the use in international terrorism and other things, and testified to members in Congress, we actually prefer if you use Bitcoin, because that can be terrorists can be tracked. Whereas if you give them a truckload of cash, you can't track that. So like Lindsey Graham had been listening to Elizabeth Warren, and then he heard from these policy experts and completely changed his position and said, okay, I realize that we need to promote the dollar abroad, and Bitcoin and crypto is a way of doing it. So bit by bit, we're bringing the expert.
The SEC's Bitcoin ETF approval was a trap, and Wall Street fell for it. Because right now, BlackRock is hoarding 10 times more BTC than they admit. But Trump's team has a plan to turn this into a $10 trillion weapon.
Who know about this up to Capitol Hill. Bo and David are bringing them throughout the Trump administration. And so it's one of those unique opportunities in history where people's eyes are open, their ears are open, and they're learning about the great, wonderful things that can come from Bitcoin and the whole marketplace.
One of the things that fascinates me is if you go back to Satoshi, the cyberpunks, if you go back to kind of the early days, maybe in the ethos of Bitcoin, it's very libertarian. It's very kind of outside the system, at least small government, if not anti-government.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, the U.S. government embracing it has been incredibly important and critical to the position that Bitcoin is in today. It was incredibly important for the SEC to approve Bitcoin ETFs, right? I think Bitcoin would have been successful regardless,
right?
But it accelerated that time frame. And so how do you think about that? Like, you guys are a pro-growth kind of...
We're going to throw government... Fairly libertarian, I think you and I met at one of the early Bitcoin conferences in Miami. I walked around there and told them I'm doing support in politics for pro-Bitcoin candidates. And everybody looked at me and said, can't the government just stay out? And if you do have to come in, can it be bipartisan? It's one of the reasons I chose to make what we do bipartisan. And yet now I think everyone realizes having the government agree this is a good thing in the economy and we shouldn't be interfering with it, that's a pretty libertarian approach. And for the most part, that's where Trump and his administration are driving the battle. Now, you still got the banks who don't want to modernize, right, and view Bitcoin and other stores of wealth as competition to what they do in the money network. So, for example, the stablecoin bill has a provision that the banks wanted in there that you couldn't pay interest on the reserves behind the stablecoin. Well, that's because they don't want to compete and have to pay interest when people hold deposits with them. Right. And so there's a lot, they've got a powerful position. They've lobbied for decades up in Capitol Hill, and they're still quietly pushing back.
Tether's CEO just dropped a bombshell. They're moving 50% of reserves to US soil, and Jamie Dimon is furious. Because this isn't about stablecoins. It's about who controls the next dollar. Here's the dirty secret.
On this, but the momentum is with us. And I think we're going to see good things happen.
And when we think about this kind of stablecoin thing, there is onshore stablecoin issuers like Circle and many, many others that exist. And then there are ones that I think people call offshore, like a Tether.
Right.
It seems like Tether is winning in the market outside the United States for sure, but also they may be coming to the United States now. And so, like, what are you hearing about kind of the competition, right? There seems to be these two different issuers. Both of them seem to be doing a good job in their respective kind of strategies and markets. But it feels like we're heating up for kind of a stablecoin war a little bit between these different issuers.
Yeah, no, exactly. And typically that means things stop up on Capitol Hill, right? They want the industry to reach a consensus on what the issues are all about. You know, you've got in the marketplace the difference of, is it only U.S. treasuries and U.S.-backed dollar reserves, or do you have other liquid assets in the marketplace behind your dollar coin? And Tether had that, has historically had that. That's in my mind, an individual choice of what type of asset you want to invest in or use. But then the question, as you pointed out, overseas versus domestic. And I think we're very much free traders at the Club for Growth. So I would say if you're going to have the government authorize stablecoins, don't limit it to U.S. only stablecoins. Include others that are developed overseas that are in the marketplace. And I understand Tether is setting up a U.S. component to meet some of those requirements. But the more the merrier, and more choices people have, the market's going to work out the most efficient, effective one, and everybody will use that until they aren't, and somebody new comes along and beats them in their game. And that's how all the rest of us benefit.
What's interesting about Club for Growth is you all have this very specific kind of pro-economic policy and viewpoint. It feels like Bitcoin and crypto are the like productization of that viewpoint, right? I always, I'm very fond of saying like, don't complain, compete, right? Like you go compete in the market.
Go do it.
And it does feel like somehow Bitcoin maybe to start, and now some of these other technologies have taken all the complaints that people had for decades about monetary policy, fiscal policy, the national debt, the way that the system works, all this stuff, and actually built a technology solution to then go compete in the market. Yeah. And so it makes sense to me that you guys would be so into, kind of Bitcoin and crypto, right?
Totally. That's totally right. It forces discipline on the government. You can't inflate the dollar and expect to compete with Bitcoin that has a fixed amount and therefore isn't going to be inflated away by government policies. The Federal Reserve doesn't like that. Congress doesn't like that because they like to spend money, even if it means inflation. And so the competition suddenly becomes government with Bitcoin or other forms of stable crypto. And the government knows it can't keep up with that.
The Fed's worst nightmare? Bitcoin is now tracking the M2 money supply, which means every time they print, BTC pumps. But Trump's Bitcoin reserve could force the Fed to surrender, and Powell just panicked.
We're all in favor of that because it promotes freedom, it promotes economic growth. The other aspect of it isn't talked about as much, but you can use that technology for all sorts of things to essentially update the internet, if you think about it that way. I've heard of companies that put car titles. Actually, the new senator from Ohio, Bernie Moreno, had a company that did exactly that. He was a car dealer, and so he figured out, we'll use blockchain to record everybody's title. It's much more secure, it's out there, you can quickly find it and search it. And so if America says we want to be at the forefront of this, it's going to be like the late 90s when the internet revolution occurred and the dot-com revolution. All sorts of new innovative products that give us more efficiency, more freedom, more individual choice will come onto the marketplace. And that's what the Club for Growth is all about.
Well, that's nailed it, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that seems to happen with a lot of these technologies is it's very global in nature. And so people are moving to various jurisdictions because there's tax competition.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the implications on the US tax policy will be. You know, there's places, I think Portugal has no capital gains on crypto transactions. Right. Places like Dubai, I don't think have any taxes whatsoever. Puerto Rico has become a hotspot for Bitcoin and crypto holders because of the tax situation there. Do you see that conversation happening in Washington where people are saying, wait, is talent leaving because of our tax policy and these other places are gaining advantage? Or are people kind of like, hey, some people are going to always move to a lower tax jurisdiction, but it's not going to affect our policy?
Actually, in DC right now, those are sort of second order questions. It's the regulatory competition that they're trying to correct. Because when the Biden administration came in, issued its executive order and directive for the agencies to really crack down on crypto, SEC wouldn't authorize until there was enormous pressure, any of the products related to it. The banks were told, we want you to, we think it's too risky, don't hold and don't bank companies that are relying on Bitcoin and crypto. So they're correcting now all that regulatory overreach. And that was driving people to Dubai and even to Europe, which has had less regulation, but not great.
You and Donald Trump have had amazing relationships. Then in the paper, at least, fallen out a little bit, come back. I think there was a famous article in Politico that was like, the Club for Growth and Donald Trump made up and fell back in love again.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the relationship, but also I think you've spent time, you understand how he thinks, you understand how he's kind of approaching this stuff. And I think a lot about policy changes usually happen from the top down. Yeah. Like none of this is happening without Trump saying, I want to protect Bitcoin. This is important. I think it's both a campaign issue, but also something that would be good for the country. And so, like, what do you think his personal perspective is on this entire thing?
One, I think he wants America to be at the forefront. He make America great again. Yeah, he wants America to lead in this area. And then second, he's very careful to keep his campaign promises. Not every politician is. The Bitcoin Reserve helps establish that, but also the continued lightening of regulation.
Prediction. By 2025, every US state will accept taxes in Bitcoin, and it's already happening in Texas. But the real shocker, the IRS is drafting rules to ban privacy coins. This is your last chance to prepare.
It means you're going to see Bitcoiners want to come to the US. It's stable, it's good, and it's going to be a great discipline on the Federal Reserve.
It feels like we have Bitcoiners that infiltrated the White House.
Yeah.
Right? Scott Bessent owns Bitcoin, Howard Lutnick owns Bitcoin, Trump owns Bitcoin, Bill Hines owns Bitcoin, David Sachs owns Bitcoin. And I know that some of them sold because they had to divest or whatever, right? But like they were Bitcoiners that held these assets and then went and got these positions, which feels very different. Like that is a huge sea change from any administration in our lifetime.
No, that's right. It's unique. It's happening. Yeah. It means it's here.
Okay. The United States will be the crypto capital of the world, which is, I think, everything else other than the Bitcoin superpower of the world.
I think that's good too. And I think, again, as we were talking about, it promotes that innovation. Now, there's a big difference between Bitcoin and the rest of crypto. Decentralized means that you've protected from somebody flooding the market with more of their coin and pocketing the value of that, because it's not controlled by one group or one person. That gives Bitcoin a big advantage, and as people are weighing what to invest in. But I think the rest of crypto, the market discipline will have them create products that people can be more comfortable with.